We come now to the work of Pablo Picasso and the whole century and a half of modern painting that started with the Impressionists. Now, the word modern has a different definition when we're talking about painting, and so that's confusing, but it can be easily straightened out. In our semester, we've been using the word modern to talk about the long period since the Renaissance, so the last 5 centuries. And from that point of view, everything but the icons that we've looked at are modern paintings. These painters are as modern as Locke or Descartes, and clearly a part of a new world that came about through modern innovations. But the language is used differently. So at a certain point in the development of artistic styles, people turn their attention elsewhere from what it was at the beginning of this modern period. And it's that change, which is really away from modern, that we call modern in when it comes to the visual arts. In music, we talk about the classical period to refer what generally we call the modern period. In painting, we talk about the old masters to refer to what in general history we call the modern period. But the something new comes that is a rejection from a kind of consensus about the way to do things and what was good that started with the modern world. It might make more sense to call it postmodern or anti-modern. It forgets the old certainties about how to do things and creates new ones. As we saw with Impressionism, it's possible to create new standards for art, and these can be driven by the question, what should truthful painting be? If we try to think seriously about how we see things and how someone putting colors on a flat surface can mimic how we see things, what's the truthful and accurate way to do that? And the Impressionists had at least a serious answer, that the paintings that came before were beautiful and accurate in their way, but were falsifying some things or overlooking some truths that could be brought out. And this question, which doesn't have a single satisfying answer, never reaches a conclusion, it keeps changing its shape and focus, has given rise to many different styles of art in the modern period. And at the center of many of those different styles is the kind of inventive genius of Pablo Picasso. And that's why he gets a special place in our study. And Pablo Picasso, you see here, his in self-portrait, that is a picture he painted by himself, of himself. He would experiment. He was the son of a painter. He grew up studying art seriously from a very young age and had an encyclopedic memory about the whole history of European art. He tried a number of experiments and conceived different ways that a painting might be done. He was the ultimate influencer when he tried it out. Other people experimented according to the pathways that he'd opened up. It was sort of the whole Kardashian family of art in the earliest 20th century. That kind of influence over others. And we should admit that for many people this is bad news, that the various modern innovations in painting seem like a falling off from something that is simple and straightforward and admirable. an honest reaction to a painting such as this one would be to say that it's a mess, it's crude, it's false, it breaks obvious rules about the way things look. It's just not as good as a more traditional style. That would be an honest reaction. A traditional painting such as this one seems to bring its pleasure with it. It's easy to enjoy and easy to admire. It seems like the artist, in order to earn our admiration, has to pay up front in talent and skill. It seems like a good system. And we in the gallery simply enjoy the product. And so the obvious question, if you could have something like that, why would you want something like this? The other is much nicer from a certain perspective. But then, of course, looking at this Picasso, you would think, well, you get the flavor of what sort of person is behind this image. You don't really get to see what she looked like in the same way that you saw that pink portrait from Joshua Reynolds. Here you see an easily recognizable woman and you see what she looked like. You don't really know what sort of person she is or what's going on inside or what the artist thought of her. It's perfectly sensible to take the classical side of that trade-off, to prefer something like this. But what I'd like you to do is at least register that it is a trade-off and that all of the benefits are not on one side or the other. This is a rather famous painting called The Portrait of Madame X. It was thought to be scandalous, so the woman should not be named, the American artist John Singer Sargent. And it manages to have a clear style and distinction about it, while all the while being perfectly realistic. And yet history says that it was not quite realistic, that Sargent exaggerated her very striking nose and narrowed her figure. The portrait seems to live in these distortions, and from a certain point of view, the painting seems to live in its deviations from strict accuracy. And if once you begin, where do you want to draw a limit? How much is too much if a picture seems notable and worth looking at because it's realistic but not totally accurate, and the artist adds something of his own eye and understanding? Where would we want to put the leash on and stop those innovations? And Picasso is using the power of painting to show us what he thinks and what he feels about the subject, and probably what the subject herself, it's called Weeping Woman, what she herself is feeling. Now, I should note at this point that this is part of the vocabulary talking about art. If you have a picture of somebody, the person that the picture is of is called the subject. The picture seems to be all wrong in what seem like almost comical ways. The two eyes are on the same side of the nose. She seems to have normal skin over much of her face, that perhaps her skeleton is showing in the lower part of the picture. But it certainly packs an emotional charge, and Picasso's using the power of paint to show us things that if he felt tied to reality and tied to accuracy in a more conventional way, he wouldn't have access to. And you can recognize from looking at the paintings of Picasso that you very often see things of very great beauty, what could be more soothing and beautiful than that lovely lavender color, those lines are crude approximations of the way, say, arms and foreheads and noses actually go, but they're sweet and beautiful in themselves because they require a certain taste that you would have to be able to like plain and simple things. Things done in the most elaborate way toward the using the most highly developed techniques that are very polished and produced according to the best uses of talent are very impressive. But they're not what one wants all the time. And many people prefer, at least in certain moods, cruder and simpler things. If they're done with some skill. We face this decision in music all the time. In some way, it's easy to agree that the singers of classical opera have the most trained voices. They're trained to make their voices approximate the power of musical instruments. They sing very difficult music. They're held to very exact standards of pitch and tone. And all of that, in some way, is said officially to be the best, and it's easy to believe it. But sometimes you'd rather have listen to somebody playing a guitar, maybe singing in a bar than on a fancy opera stage, that you'd rather have the intimacy of being able to see the crude human dimensions. You do not require the great polish of Leonardo's painting, where you'd never see the hair of the brush on the canvas, and it's not always what we want. Perhaps someone with a taste for visual things and a quick brush would please us more, in the same way that the simple singer in a normal tone of voice pleases us better than the star of opera who can sing clearly throughout a huge auditorium full of people. And it's part of Picasso's charm that at certain times he painted like a child. And you probably know whether you could appreciate Picasso by knowing whether you can imagine painting like a child as praise for a painter rather than a great insult. What I've shown here is perhaps the oldest, is certainly one of the older paintings in human history. It's a famous cave painting from Lascaux in France. It seems to be 15,000 years old. And notice the overlap between Picasso's style and this style. And again, it might not seem like praise. It might seem like a great insult to say that a painter painted in the original way as though nothing had ever advanced. But Picasso thought there must be something basic and human about these ordinary styles. And one thing that you will notice about it, which will become a theme of our reflection, is that this painting paints in some ways what we see. They saw bulls running around prehistoric France, and they paint them. This is what they looked like to them. We can recognize the animal. But in some ways they painted what they know. So we know a bull has two horns and that they're curved. This painting represents what geometrically we know the horns, what shape they take, even though that's not the way we would see them if we saw the rest of the bull from the side like this.